minute to show up if they want. I guess we can start, even though I think I know all of you. My name is Jack Howard. I'm an intern from the University of Chicago. I'm working with Education USA. I'm studying humanities and history.
And my name is Manny. I am also a student at the University of Chicago, and I am one of the interns working at the Mexico City Advising Center with Education USA. And I'm planning on majoring in computer science.
Okay, great. So let's get started. This is the order of the SAT with the time for each section. Today we will be focusing on number 2, writing and language. It's a 35-minute section with 44 questions. So I believe it's the one where you will have to answer questions the fastest. You know, it's the only one where you have less than 1 minute per question. This, might sound a bit daunting, but I'm sure, once you start, getting into the questions, this will seem perfectly doable. Okay, so Manny?
Yeah, so last week we touched on the reading section of the SAT and a lot of the tips and strategies that will help you do well in that section. And we're going to be doing the same today for the writing section. One of the biggest things that is very similar between the reading and writing sections are that there will be passages that you'll read. While the reading section is more so testing you on how able you are to comprehend what you've read and create judgments based off of what you've read as well. The writing section is more so about understanding the way that words go together and form ideas, things like syntax or things like punctuation or grammar in general. You'll be working on improving certain words and phrases to make sure that those main points that you're reading get across. And sometimes that can be tricky, but that's not to worry. Today's session is going to help us to gain some practice and some knowledge on moving through the section much easier, and also just getting familiar with those types of questions and the way in which we're going to work on improving those words and phrases to answer those questions very well. And the writing test contains about I think it was 44 questions, and there's 35 minutes to answer all of those. Yeah, that's mostly the gist of the writing and language section of the SAT. So, yeah.
Great. I would like to start with just going over some very common question types, some things they might try and trip you up on. These are important. Sorry that the picture on this one's a little blurry. It's not as bad on the others. Homophones. Is anyone familiar with the concept of homophones? Homophones are words that are pronounced the same but are spelled differently and are different words. The SAT, will put questions about these. So here is an example question. Generally, we do, for those of you who don't know, if there really are any, we do the raise hand function on Zoom to answer questions. Is there anyone who can answer this question for us? I guess I'll give a little bit of background. So the homophone in this one is the word fair, which can obviously mean, I believe, three, maybe more, but at least three different things. A fair is in a place where you go, like a carnival or, like an outdoor event. A fair can mean, like something you pay to get on a bus, something like that. Or it can be a verb, like, oh, how are you faring and all of this? Like, just doing, how are you holding up? So, so it's asking generally, which one of those do we want in this place and how would it be spelled? Can anyone raise their hand and give me an answer to this? B is, I believe, correct. It's also, wait, I'm sorry, it's also asking about than and then. Those are indirect homophones because some people will pronounce them more differently, but some will pronounce them very similar. I tend to pronounce them sort of similarly. I think that's my accent. But it's important to pay attention to these. They're an easy one to get wrong. So, homophones. So verb tenses as well is an important one. You have to make sure that if you have multiple verbs in a sentence, that their tenses are matched up, or if they aren't supposed to be matched up, they're unmatched in the right way. So you might want to say like, so if you're talking like yesterday I went to the store, saw a doctor and eat, a sandwich, that would be wrong. It would be ate a sandwich. But you could also do something more like yesterday, I went to the doctor earlier and now I will eat a sandwich. You can have different verb tenses, of course. I'm sure you all know this, but it's just important to formalize it a tiny bit. The correct answer for this question, I have a C. Does anyone agree with this? Okay, so we have a C and an A. Interesting. So I'll read the sentence out loud and see where we go from there. Nutritionists consider Greek yogurt to be healthy food. It is an excellent source of calcium and protein. Serves to be calcium and protein. Serves to be a digestive aid, and it contains few calories in its unsweetened, low, and non-fat forms. So I believe it is actually C for this. So mind you, it's not just the tenses that need to agree. Also, I believe what's called concordance needs to happen, where that is where if you use a verb in one context, you have to use it in a corresponding context later on. So it is an excellent source. So it says it is an excellent source of calcium and protein. Serves to be a digestive aid. And it contains few calories. The thing is though, it used it before is, but it didn't use it before serves. So it seems like hold on, I'm gonna use educational technology here. It seems like this it right here serves both as the subject of this is and this serves. So it wouldn't be right to bring in a new subject over here. That is why C is the correct answer. Manny, that sounds right to you, right? Is that a good way of explaining it?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, sorry. It's difficult to use language to talk about language, as I'm sure we all know. Great. But I understand where you're all coming from with A. That's probably the second most common answer. But you just have to, so I'll not to dwell on this, but I'll give a quick example. Yeah, I'll give a good example would be like another example might be golf is a fun sport to play because it is difficult, um, difficult, community-oriented, and it is played outside. Doesn't that sound a little bit off because you're bringing in a second it when you have three verbs? You want to follow the previous verb. You want to have the same subject as the previous verb if you're listing three verbs. You could also say you could also say for this sentence, it is an excellent source of calcium and protein. It serves as a digestive aid, and it contains few. But since you can't change the serves on this, you have to change the ate. You have to change it to contains. Commas and semicolons. So this is another common one. A lot of people get this wrong. Commas cannot be the barrier between two separate ideas, while semicolons can. So can anyone give an answer to this first question right here, which even though we're not doing a even though we're not right now doing a quiz in numbers, question 16 on this. Raise your hand, please, or put it in the chat if you would prefer. Okay, so we have some B's and a C. Let's go through it then. So the couch and chairs, in keeping with the style of the time, are characterized by elegantly curved arms and legs. They are covered in luxurious velvet. This is, okay, so now we also have an A and some more C's. Interesting. So the question with this, so it uses a comma, and all the answers have commas except for C, which has nothing. So hold on. Sorry. So the question is this a completely new idea? So the thing is, the comma here is not enough of a, doesn't serve as enough of enough punctuation, enough of a full stop to start a completely new thought. And they are covered in luxurious velvet is a completely new thought because you're bringing in a new subject, you're bringing in a new verb. So you could do a semicolon there, but none of the options have semicolons. So C is correct in this. C is correct here because when you change it to legs and with no comma, the rest of the phrase are covered in luxurious velvet just becomes another another thing in the list, as it's called. So you already have are characterized by elegantly curved arms, and so then it would just be and are covered in luxurious velvet. You can have the word are, as the as two items in a sequence there. Could anyone try question 21 here? Oh, someone already did. Anyone else have any ideas for 21? Chat or raise your hand. So we got a B and a D. Anyone else? Okay, some more are coming in. Okay, so we got a lot of D's, and that is correct. So would anyone like to explain to me why the answer D is correct? Raise your hand. Anyone? Okay, well, I'll go for it. Living independently and demonstrating an intense work ethic, the Harvey girls became known as a transformative force in the American West. This is obvious. The second part of the sentence, as can be seen here, that is clearly not a different thought, because the first part of the sentence is the cause. They were known as a transformative force because they lived independently and demonstrated intense work ethic. So there is definitely not a semicolon necessary there. Sorry for the interference noise, by the way. There's a thunderstorm going on here. So you don't need a semicolon, because semicolons only separate thoughts. The correct answer is indeed D, because a comma would be the right punctuation to separate the cause and the effect when they're part of the same thought. Colons. Colons are another one that people mess up. I don't think quite as much as semicolons, but they're messed up a good deal. Colons always come after an independent clause. So can anyone raise their hand and tell me what an independent clause is? Independent clause. Can anyone raise their hand and tell me what an independent clause is? Correct. Thank you, Marcos. Pietro, why don't you give your answer to that? Thank you. Pietro?
Can you hear Pietro?
No, can other people hear him? Okay, that's understandable. See if you can, but if not, feel free to put what you want to say in the chat box. But yeah, no, an independent clause is something that basically is its own thought. It can be a sentence in itself. So this is important. I went to the store is an independent clause, while when I went to the store is not, because you can't just say when I went to the store. You need to say when I went to the store, I did something. If it starts with something like when or while, those are dependent clauses, meaning they depend on something else. So can anyone else give me their answers for 32? Okay, so we have B's and C's. I'm sorry, give me one moment if you would. So the answer to this one, sorry, let me just find the answer to make sure I don't lead you guys astray. This is a difficult one, I must say. I think you all aren't necessarily, you know, too far off by saying that it's C, which was the common answer. The correct answer though is A. The correct answer is A. This is because you are initiating a list and it is after an independent clause. If you're initiating a list after an independent clause, you want it to be a colon. So no change is necessary in this. But it's understandable why you would think it was C, because if you read it aloud, it sounds a bit like there might be a comma there. You take a half breath there. But be careful of that. Colons come after independent clauses and initiate lists of things. If it was after a dependent clause, it would be a comma, I believe. Great. Apostrophes. So apostrophes can, you know, be a lot of things. In this context, you know, they're possessives. For singular possessives, you know, I might say, oh, this is Abril's, then it would be apostrophe S. If I was to say it belongs to multiple people, like, oh, this was the, you know, this belonged to the students, it was the students' activity that has been belonging to multiple students, it would be S apostrophe. So can anyone give me an answer to number 4 here? Take a second. So we have one answer, I think 2 answers. I'd like to see a few more before I throw in the towel and give you the answer here. Okay, so we got B's and C's and an A. So when it says it's the biological clock of the body. So obviously the body possesses the biological clock and you need a possessive, which means you need an apostrophe. So A is out. So what you have now is you have B, C, and D. But the thing is, it's referring to the body. It's referring to like one particular body's biological clock. Like not one particular body, but sort of like any particular body, not all bodies, biological clocks, but the biological clocks within one body. So I believe you can also get rid of B because you want it to be singular, not plural. I'll think of an example. If you say, now this is a difficult one. See, it's hard to explain these, and that's kind of why this is a difficult test. But yeah, a singular concept. That's a perfect way of explaining it. Thank you, Marco. It's not referring to one physical body per se, but the body, as in a concept that we all know. So we know that it's not that. So we're left with the last two. Yeah, in general. So the body in general. It's referring to the body as a concept, as an object that we all know, not one specific one. It's like it's saying your body. Even though, I'm talking to 16 people, so that's technically a lot of people, that's singular because it's your, one. Yeah. So it's referring to the general concept of the body. So maybe think about it this way. If it were to say a nation's king often wears a crown, you'd be referring to not one specific nation, but you would be referring to the king of one nation. Does that make sense? Okay, so it makes some sense to Jorge. Okay. Once again, these really are difficult, and I'm sorry if I'm not doing a perfect job explaining it. So please do not hesitate to raise your hands or put any confusion you have in the chat box. The answer, so we have C and D now. Clocks, as we can see though, is not a possessive. Biological clocks, are something belonging to the body, but nothing in this sentence belongs to the biological clocks. So it doesn't need to be a possessive, and it doesn't need an apostrophe. I mean, I'm sure you all know that apostrophes can be used in sort of a more colloquial way as a conjunction, not a conjunction, a contraction. I mean, you all know, like, it is can be contracted to IT apostrophe S, it's, but that's different, and you won't really see that here. That's more colloquial, and this is more, yeah, a bit, or not really. It doesn't, contractions don't really simplify, they more just reduce syllables. So, here, I'll put it in the chat box. Do not and don't. Yeah, exactly. Will not, won't, do not, don't. It takes a syllable out. But you aren't going to really use those here. Okay. Great. The answer is C. SVA, also known as subject-verb agreement. Plural subjects use plural verbs. Singular subjects use singular verbs. It can trip people up more than you'd think, though. So here we are. Where's the sentence begin? Yet some of the earliest known works of art, including paintings and drawings tens of thousands of years old, found on cave walls in Spain and France, portrays animals. Can someone give the answer they think is correct for this? I'm getting C, and C is in fact the correct answer. I mean, there's a lot of there's just a lot of words between the subject and that verb. So, but I mean, frankly, you might even want to, in a question like this, just underline the subject so you don't forget it. So the subject here is some of the earliest known works of art. The subject is works. The word works is your subject. That is a plural word with an S right there. So works portray something. You can't say, oh yeah, the earliest known works of art portrays this. It's the earliest known works of art portray something. So when they ask you questions like this, they're generally going to try and separate the subject and verb by about 2 lines like they do here, or maybe even more. Try and see through that. That's where they're going to try and trip you up. Hold on. Yeah, modifiers is the last one in this case. So this is a complicated one, a little difficult to explain. But modifiers, or things that, just modify other things in a sentence, should be close to or next to what they describe. And this generally helps avoid ambiguity. It makes things clearer. So, an example of this might be, he said he was going to train harder at the press conference. In that sentence, you don't know if at the press conference he said he was going to train harder, or he said that at the press conference he was going to train harder. You don't know if he's going to train at the press conference, or he is just saying at the press conference that he will train harder. So the sentence you would want for that is probably something like, at the press conference, he said he would train harder. Can anyone take a look at number 21 here, because I'm definitely not using numbers in order right now, and give me what they think is correct? I'll give you all a second. Yep, so I'm getting some D's here. I'm getting some D's and an explanation, which I like. I'll give everyone else a minute to try and read through. I mean, it was only a few seconds that you had with this, and you're going to have probably 50 seconds on average per question. Sorry. The answer all of you gave, D, is in fact correct. And Jorge was nice enough to put in the chat box the answer, the explanation of because the knobs are part of the desk. I think that's a very nice, succinct way of putting it. Nice, clear way of phrasing a difficult concept. With the sentence the way it appears in the passage, you don't know if the visitor was dotted with pin-sized knobs, or her fascination was dotted with pin-sized knobs, or the writing desk was dotted with pin-sized knobs, or the door is. Or the drawer is. And that's just bad writing. To have that much ambiguity in a formal paper is just not what you want. So D is correct, because in D, you know that the drawers are the things that are dotted with pin-sized knobs. Okay. Manny, you wanna take the reins now? Manny, you there? Maybe his connection dropped out. I think there's a lot of storms going on in the country right now. Okay. Well, anyone then, please try to do question 1, and I'd love it if people could raise their hand and give an explanation on this, not just give an answer in the text box. I'll give everyone a second. So, any hands for anyone who can give their, who can, speak to everyone and give their reasoning for the answer. Give an answer and give your reasoning. Guess people really aren't in a talkative mood today, huh? Well, they're participating in the chat box, which, is good, but I'd really like it if people could speak up a bit. But I won't force you. Give me one moment, though. Sorry. Manny, are you there? He has the answers. I do too, but I don't have them up. So I will have to. You'll have to give me one moment to open up the answer key. So sorry for the inconvenience here. So yeah, I am almost there. Sorry, it's hard to navigate these. Okay, so the answers people are giving for question 1. So I'm getting some D. I'm getting, some people are saying C. I think D is the, probably the predominant, but we're getting C, somewhat. Sorry, I have to admit someone now. The correct answer to this question is, in fact, D. And here is why. Sorry. D is the best answer because a comma is needed to separate the main independent clause, quote, in the winter, ... Lake 227. So starting with in the winter and ending in Lake 227, that's the independent clause. It's necessary to separate the independent clause from the dependent clause that describes the lake. The pronoun one is used correctly to refer to its antecedent, Lake 227. Choice A is incorrect because it creates a comma splice, which is two independent clauses joined by only a comma, which we discussed. You need, can anyone, even though I'm sure you know, can anyone put in the chat box or maybe raise your hand to tell me what you can separate, what you need to separate two independent clauses within a sentence? We went over this. Pietro.
So, well, you can use a semicolon or a period.
Correct.
Or a dot.
Very nice. Thank you. Yeah. And so for 2, I'm getting, some people are saying A. Some people are saying A for 2. Well, I think everyone's had time to read over 2, but I'll give you just a moment at least. In question 2. So Natalia says A. Okay, A. A is correct. A is the best answer because the comma is used correctly to separate the introductory dependent clause and from the independent clause that follows it. So the introductory dependent clause is while to impossible, and the dependent clause, the dependent clause is while to irresponsible, and the independent clause follows after that. And you need a comma, of course, to separate those two. Choices B and C, choices B, C, and D are incorrect because the comma in each is misplaced. B and D do not have a comma where one is needed after the dependent clause. C, a comma is provided. There's an unnecessary comma after it in comma after and. You don't need the comma after and. Pietro, your hand is still up. Do you have a question or something? Okay.
No, sorry.
No, it's fine. I do that all the time. No worries. Just, can people still see the PowerPoint? I'm sorry, I'm not a techie. Could anyone put a yes maybe in the chat box if they can still see the PowerPoint right now? Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I'm gonna pretend I knew that was happening all along. Thank you all so much. Oh, Manny, you're back. You wanna go now?
Yeah, sure. All right. So for this these next two questions, we have this passage, this part of the passage here that reads, Schindler and Brunskill were investigating possible causes for the large blooms of blue-green algae or cyanobacteria that had been affecting bodies of water such as Lake Erie. In addition to being unsightly and odorous, these algal blooms cause oxygen depletion. Oxygen depletion kills fish and other wildlife in the lake. Just weeks after the scientists added the nitrates and phosphates, the water in Lake 227 turned bright green. It was thick with the same type of algal blooms that had plagued Lake Erie. So for question number 3, this question is about combining the underlined sentences. And in many cases, there are going to be questions that ask you how you can make some of the words or the sentences more concise and straight to the point. So for number 3, which choice most effectively combines the underlined sentences? Is it A, B, C, or D? If you'd like to throw your answer in the chat, that's great as well. Or if you'd like to raise your hand and share your answer, that's good too. So I'm starting to see some D's in the chat. Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm starting, yeah, a lot of the answers are D in this case. And D, in fact, is the correct answer. It is the best answer because it most clearly and concisely puts those sentences together with the right and correct punctuation. And the choice gets rid of words that we don't really need, and commas are placed in the right spots between each of the clauses. So yes, the comma separates the dependent clause that's, well, the dependent clause that's in beginning and the independent clause as well as the clause that follows it. Great job. For number 4, how would we change the punctuation in that phrase or that set of words? Would it be A, no change, B, C, or D? And feel free to put your answer in the chat and yeah. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of these. I just saw a C as well. Okay, so The correct answer for the correct answer for number 4 is actually choice B. Um, and that does seem a little bit confusing at first. Um, Basically, the reason that choice B is the best answer is because the colon that's there in choice B is used correctly to introduce the independent clause, the clause that reads, "It was thick with the same type of algal blooms that had plagued Lake Erie." The colon in choice B introduces that sentence, that clause correctly, and it allows the following sentence to explain or sort of elaborate on the information that happened before in the sentence. Choice A isn't correct, unfortunately, because the colon is misplaced. It should be put after the word green and not after the word with. Choice C seemed it seemed correct for some of us, but it's incorrect because the dash is not placed correctly. If it were placed after the word green, it might have worked much better because there's still that pause, and then it joins that independent clause that we were working with. Choice D isn't correct either because the comma there creates a comma splice. The comma can't be used to transition or separate um, or excuse me, not separate, but a comma can't be used to transition or join two independent clauses. It has to have a conjunction with it. So um, choice D would have been correct if it was a comma and, or a comma but, or a comma so. A comma with a conjunction would have made choice D correct. But the correct and best answer for this question was actually choice B. All right. So for the next set of questions, we have um, 5, 6, and 7. And this passage reads, "One mission of the experimental lakes area is to conduct research that helps people better understand threats to the environment. The scientists divided the lake in half by placing a nylon barrier through the narrowest part of its figure-8 shape. In one half of Lake 226, they added phosphates, nitrates, and a source of carbon. In the other, they added just nitrates, and a source of carbon was added. Schindler and Brustill hypothesized that phosphates were responsible for the growth of cyanobacteria. The experiment confirmed their suspicions when half of the lake containing the phosphates was teeming with blue-green algae." So for question number 5, which choice provides the best transition from the previous paragraph to this one? This question here will require you to make sure that you read most likely like the last few sentences or the last sentence of the previous paragraph and this sentence here to connect the two and see how the transition goes. So if you have any guesses or you've come up with an answer for this question, question number 5, please throw that in the chat. So I'm seeing C. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of C's. Okay. Okay, so the correct answer for number 5 is actually C, which is correct. Yes, good job. Does anyone would anyone like to share how they came up with C for this answer, feel free to raise your hand to share. Natalia?
Yes, I chose letter D because letter C because it talks about the algae uh-huh, that was mentioned in the first paragraph. So it talks about that, and then it talks about the new experiment that is being done in like 226, and the other one was 227. So I think like in this sentence, you can, well, it includes like the last part of the first paragraph and the first part of this paragraph.
Great, thank you for sharing that, Natalia. Yes, there are different lakes that are mentioned within this paragraph and the previous one. Jorge also explained that in the chat as well, that Lake 226 wasn't the main topic of the last one, but the transition with C allows us to connect the two because of the algae that was mentioned in both of those. So good job on that one. For number 6, we have the underlined phrase, and a source of carbon was added. Reading the sentence around that, which of the changes makes the most sense? Would it be A, no change, B, and a source of carbon, full stop, C, plus also a source of carbon, or D, but also adding a source of carbon? And feel free to put your answers in the chat. Okay, I'm seeing B's. I'm seeing B. Okay. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of B's. The correct answer for this question is, in fact, choice B. And choices A, C, and D are incorrect because they're repetitive. But choice B is the best answer because it's concise and it doesn't repeat any words, or it doesn't add any unnecessary words either. In choice A, the words was added. Those were words we didn't need, but they were added anyway, which doesn't help us to get straight to the point. In choice C, plus also, and choice D, also adding, are repetitive and go along the same line of thought. And Jorge also mentioned a very good point in the chat. C and D, they sounded a bit too exaggerated because of that repetition of similar words. So make sure to, when you're answering these questions, to look out for, repetition, and make sure that you catch those so that you can avoid those answers, unless the question asks which of those answers aren't the best. So then for number 7, we have the underlined words was teeming. In that whole sentence, it says the experiment confirmed their suspicions when half of the lake containing the phosphates was teeming with the blue-green algae. I think option D is a bit cut off, but I can read off option D. Give me a second here. Okay. So the 4 choices for answer 7 are either A, no change, B, were teeming, C, are teeming, or D, teams. So option D is teams. So if you have a answer for number 7, please throw that in the chat. Okay, I'm starting to see some of the answers roll in. Okay. So I'm getting A for the most part. Okay, so the correct answer for number 7 here is choice A, which is the choice that you all picked, which is correct. Would anyone like to explain how they arrived at number 7? Feel free to raise your hand. Pietro?
Okay, so, well, first of all, B cannot be the right answer because it is well, the verb is agreeing with the subject, with lake, with a half of the lake, which is singular, so word teaming it cannot be because it is plural. And then also C is plural and is on another tense, and the letter G also is team, so it cannot be. So was teaming is singular and in the past tense. Well, no.
No, that's great. Thank you for sharing that, Pietro. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think one of the most important things to remember when you're answering these questions is also to remember what the verb and subject are in the sentence. Someone might easily confuse the subject to be the phosphates instead of the half of the lake. So it's important to make sure that you're having the right agreement when you read those sentences. Also, like you were mentioning with the verb tenses, again, that verb tense agrees with the singular subject, and it stays the same with the other past tense verbs that are in the paragraph. But all of the other ones use plural and past tense verbs. So yeah, choice A is the correct answer for number 7.
Okay, I think we should probably take our break now. So stretch, get some water, see you back at 6:10. Sound good to you, Manny?
Yeah.
Okay. See everyone back. Oh, 6:10. Sorry, I'm in a different time zone. 5:10. Yeah, 5:10.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm on the East Coast of the United States, so it's Eastern Standard here. But 5:10. See you then. Questions and go to tips for the test. Give everybody another second or two. Okay, so advice for the writing and language section. Sometimes with this, you have to, trust your gut is, a little bit idiomatic, but you have to go with what sounds the most reasonable. All of these questions have a correct answer that follows grammatical rules. But sometimes, if you get to the end and you're kind of rushing through and you can't necessarily summon up the grammatical proof for every single one, it can often be helpful to just, read it aloud, not read it aloud, I guess. I talk about that in the next. Read it to yourself and just think which one seems the best. Yeah. Okay, so kind of going off that, I would recommend, when you see a question that, focuses on a word or two, maybe, I would recommend reading the whole sentence. But don't just skim the whole sentence. Read it to yourself. Like personally, I like kind of, like try and imagine what the words sound like and how I would read it aloud, because that tends to help with certain things. I mean, how things are spoken isn't irrelevant. Commas, for example, which are, often a pain in the SAT, commas generally signify a time in a sentence where you would stop to breathe. So you might want to consider thinking about how you might read something aloud. It's important to remember that this is not the reading, comprehension, and evidence-based reading section. I mean, on the one hand, obviously, but the strategy is different. Those sections are a lot more about content. This section is a lot more about mechanics. In that sense, you don't really need to understand the way the argument works in the same way, or the way the data is presented in the same way. You want to focus more on the parts and maybe a bit less on the whole. You will have some questions that will ask something along the lines of, oh, should this paragraph have been put here? Should this sentence have been put here? In those cases, you just have to read the whole passage and, decide it that way. But you're not going to get questions like, oh, what is the shift in this? So I remember in SAT evidence-based reading, we had a question that was like, what is the shift in this? And it was like, oh, is it a shift from a description of a restaurant to a description of an encounter? Is it a shift from, talking about his opinions to talking about what he saw? You're not going to get those kind of difficult general context-based questions. So I would say focus on the specific sentences you're being asked about, unless otherwise directed to, which would generally be questions about how to order sentences and paragraphs. I'm not saying don't read the entire thing. I'm just saying that this is about how to write sentences, not how to understand whole paragraphs, if that makes any sense. Sometimes none of the answers will seem that great. I mean, this is true in evidence-based reading too. But it's more true in this. In word choice questions, maybe most of all, word choice, it can't be perfect. Like sometimes, it will ask about word choice and you might say you might be thinking like, oh, well, I wouldn't use any of these words. It's understandable, but you just have to remember it's asking for the best answer, okay? It's asking for the best answer, not, don't get caught up in the fact that the answer that you think is perfect might not be there. I mean, you do want to read the whole passage, but there's no need to really, really close read it. Honestly, if there's 5-6 lines where it doesn't ask you about anything, skimming that is probably fine. You want to expose yourself, I think, to pretty much every line, but you don't necessarily have to understand lines they're not asking you about. This is a difference with evidence-based reading. In evidence-based reading, you want to understand the passage. You want to, understand how the parts of the passage work together to form an argument or tell a story. In this, it's nice if you do maybe, but that's pretty secondary. You're being asked about specific elements of writing. One thing, so you can't go back to, this is the second section. You cannot go back to evidence-based reading, but you can obviously go back to the beginning of this section during this test. So suppose there's one you're just kind of stumped on, you forget the grammar rule. You might want to consider, marking that for later. And then if you have time at the end, which you might, at least in my experience, this has been one of the quicker ones where people tend to have extra time. You might want to consider, looking for other times in the passages where they use that grammar rule and see how they do it. Unless it's underlined, unless they're asking you a question about it, everything else is correct. Everything that they are not asking you about, like all the lines that have no underlining in them, those are correct. And you can, if all else fails, you can look at those for context clues about how the grammar rules work. But this is a bit of a Hail Mary. Last but not, this is a pretty mechanical thing. I keep using the words mechanical because it's about the mechanics of writing. A good way to study for this, beyond just reading about it and practicing it, pay attention as much as you can when you're reading academic papers or textbooks to things like what we've talked about. Paying a little bit of attention, maybe noticing like, the concordance here, I can see how it works out. It says it does this, it does that, and it does this. That can help out. So, very quick summary. If all else fails, read it to yourself mentally and choose what, seems kind of most comfortable. Though obviously that's the last resort. Read the whole sentence you're being asked about carefully, but feel free to skim the whole passage. I think most SAT tutors would say that. Choose the best option. I mean, I put that because I remember when I was studying for this part, the teacher I was working with and I used to kind of get in arguments. I would say like, but I don't think this is a good option. I think, this is not great. I think it works, but I wouldn't write it this way. And he would just say, listen, you're not trying to, do something perfect. You're trying to, fix it so it follows grammatical rules. Yeah, and that the parts of the passage that are not being asked about are correct, and you can look at that if you need to for help on other grammar rules. And pay attention to spelling, of course, because of homophone questions. I guess I will go with, I'll do a few questions myself now. Manny, where did you guys leave off? Sorry.
Yeah, so I think we left off on question 7 with the lake, about the lake passage.
Yeah, I remember
Like
that. So I think I could start with 8 because I think you completed 7.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Sorry to do this to you. Do you have the answers up? It's hard to switch between the screens.
Oh yeah, I've got them. Yeah, no worries.
Great. Okay. So yeah. Take a crack at number 8. Okay, so I see one answer. Anyone else? Put it in the chat box or raise your hand to discuss it. Okay. Okay. Oh, so it's pretty divided. Interesting. This is going to be worth talking about, I think. Interesting. Okay. So why don't I read it aloud? Schindler and Brunskil's findings were shown off by the journal Science. So we're getting B and C mostly. So people generally don't think it needs no change. I would agree. I think this does need a change. A, I think, yeah. I think that shown off by is a little bit informal. I think it's a bit too, that's not really how people would write, especially, you know, regarding a serious scientific journal like Science. Sorry, technology. So we're generally looking between B and C. Schindler and Brunskill's findings were put in the spotlight of the journal Science and published in the journal Science. So this is one where none of the answers really are terrible, I don't think. I think all of them are grammatically acceptable. The correct answer, I believe, is C. Manny, is that correct?
Yes, the correct answer for this one is C.
And what's the justification they give? Because this is a difficult one. It's a word choice one, and these, you know, these are the ones that kind of trip people up because, you know, none of them flatly don't work. What's the reasoning they give?
Yeah, so the reasoning for choice C that they give is because the verb published most effectively indicates the relationships between research findings and a journal, in this case, the journal Science. Scientific research is published in scientific journals. So I think it's more so like having that word actually align with the action or like the process of putting findings in journals is why published was the best answer in this case.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. So put in the spotlight of that, I mean, grammatically it works, but the thing is, scientific journals don't have spotlights. They're published, you know, they aren't watched or, you know, something like that. And you want your writing, or, you know, you want the writing in this certainly, and you want your writing too, I think, to just be as clear as possible. You know, when you're writing fiction, maybe you would want to use, you know, metaphors and similes in ways that are sort of, you know, confusing and interesting. But in something like this, it's trying to get the information across as clearly as possible with no ambiguity, or as little as possible. I think published does that best because it's a scientific journal and it publishes it, and that's the relationship best summed up. Okay, so the next one. Take a look, drop your answers in the chat box, or raise your hand if you would like. So D, we're getting D for this. Let me see. So yeah, I think we have a consensus on D here. For example, so the sentence as it is now. For example, legislators in Canada passed laws banning phosphate in laundry detergents, which had been entering the water supply. So this is one where you will have to refer back to the previous sentence. So I'll go there. The research demonstrated a clear correlation between introducing phosphates and the growth of blue-green algae. Obviously, Canada passing a law is not an example of this correlation. It's legislative, you know, it's a legislation, and we were talking about science. So you can't use the word for example. You also wouldn't really want to use the word similarly for the same reason. You know, it's not similar. One is the reason. I mean, no, sorry. One is a scientific statement. The other is, you know, something that happened regarding that, but the legislation is not very similar to the scientific data. However, I think pretty clearly doesn't work because there's nothing contradictory between there's nothing contradictory, I don't think, between the Canadian government passing this legislation and the data that's presented up here, or, you know, in the rest, but specifically in this sentence. Yeah. So the answer is D. That's right, Manny, right?
Yes, the answer for this one is D, subsequently.
Okay, so we've got some answers for 10, but could anyone else, you know, who hasn't, take a look at question 10, read it over, and give your thoughts. One thing I'll say when you're doing this, I worry that I didn't make it clear enough. You do want to at least, you know, like, at least understand every sentence. My point is that you don't, I worry I was making it sound like you really just didn't have to care about the sentences that you weren't being asked about. Those sentences do matter. It's just that you don't have to understand the mechanics of them in the same way. The content matters, but not the mechanics. Because you're only being asked about the like writing mechanics of the questions that you're only being asked about the writing mechanics in the sentences with underlined passages, or, I mean, mostly that, yeah. There are some things that will ask you about ordering, but that's pretty rare, I think. All you need to get from the non-underlined sentences is what they're saying. You don't need to, you know, read for perfection. You just need to understand what they're trying to say. But it is important to understand what they're trying to say. So we're getting B, I think, a good deal. Manny, what's the correct answer on this one?
Yeah, so the correct answer for this question is choice B.
Yeah. Yeah, could you give the reasoning on that one? This is hard to explain, I think.
Definitely. I think someone in the chat, Jorge, talked about, he gave some of the same reasoning that the explanation does as well. B is the only answer that actually deals with a policy outcome that's related to the research. So the decision of creating laws to reduce the phosphates in detergents, that was specifically a policy outcome that was demonstrated or talked about from the research that the passage is talking about. All of the other answers don't necessarily talk about policy or creating laws in order to, you know, surrounding the research that happened. So yes, the correct answer would be B.
Okay, so because of formatting, I think we only were able to fit question 11 on this slide. People take a look at question 11. So we're getting some people, so we've gotten 2 different answers thus far. Feel free to put your answer in the chat. Okay. Okay. Interesting. So, so it seems like we're mostly getting C, which I think is probably right. Manny, I don't want to I don't want to give people the wrong answer.
Yeah, don't worry about that. I don't think you did give the wrong answer. The correct answer for number 11 is, in fact, C.
Yeah. So with this one, it's important to read the question, up here, not just the passage and the answers. I think, any of these could, to some degree, fit in there, and it wouldn't, the rest wouldn't quite sound right, but they wouldn't, be unbelievably, egregiously, obviously wrong. What you need to do, though, is read that it's not just asking for something that fits there. It's asking for an answer that most effectively anticipates and addresses a relevant counter-argument to the argument in favor of the types of experiments described in the passage. So, effectively anticipates and addresses. So, yeah, I think C does that best, definitely, because it anticipates the argument, as in saying, like, obviously scientists should not be allowed to. It's hard to explain, but it's saying that it's anticipating that somebody would say scientists should not be allowed to randomly perform experiments on just any body of water. It's anticipating that, and it addresses it by saying, obviously, scientists should not be able to do that. Yeah. Is there anything in the reasoning, Manny, that I didn't cover there?
No, I think mostly the reasoning was pretty much the same. It just kind of explained it and differently, saying that instead of like necessarily saying anticipating, although the author did, acknowledging is the word that they used. That scientists shouldn't be allowed to just perform experiments on any body of water. Shows that they're aware of those potential arguments. So yeah, basically what you were saying is the explanation for why C works.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so take a look at this. Answers for number 12, please. Okay, so the answer, we seem to have a consensus mostly completely around the answer D. Can anyone please raise their hand and explain why they arrived at D? Pietro?
Okay, so, well, stages isn't like a possessive, it shouldn't be a possessive noun, and also it's with an apostrophe is a contraction of it is, and in order to be possessive it should be it's without an apostrophe. And yeah.
Okay, I think that was really well said. Yeah, no, definitely. Let's move on to 13. Just quick note. 13 is not completely unlike question 9. You know, you're trying to use an introductory word to describe the relationship between two sentences, between the previous sentence and the sentence that it's starting. So just keep that in mind. They'll ask some of these, and it's worth practicing them. So any answers you have for 13, put them in the chat box or raise your hand. Okay, so it looks like we have, for the second time in a row, arrived at a consensus around the answer D. Can somebody who arrived at that, preferably somebody who we haven't heard from before, tell us how they arrived there? Or if you got something else, make your case. Or, you know, at least explain any confusion you have. Anyone? Okay, that's understandable. It's a Monday. Maybe people aren't really in the mood to speak up in a practice session. So yeah, 13. I'll read the previous sentence and this one. Italy's Tower of Pisa has been leaning southward since the initial stages of its construction over 800 years ago. Indeed, if the tower's construction had not taken 2 centuries and involved significant breaks due to war and civil unrest, which allowed the ground beneath the tower to settle, the tower would likely have collapsed before it was completed. So the word I'll go through. I think the most obviously wrong is therefore. I mean, that would just make no sense because it just doesn't, because I think that the fact that the tower's been leaning for so long, you know, that's not really a reason for anything that is discussed in the next sentence. You know, it would therefore only relates to a cause and effect relation. And there's really no cause and effect relationship where sentence 1 is the cause and sentence 2 is the effect. Yeah. So, Manny, could you actually explain why it's not indeed? I'm a little confused on this myself. This is a hard one.
No, yeah, actually, the correct answer is choice A, indeed.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and so the reasoning that they gave was talking about how it appropriately like points back to and elaborates on the facts that were provided in the sentence before. So for example, by saying indeed, it's basically sort of how can I say this? It's sort of like re-emphasizing or agreeing with the statement that came before, agreeing with the fact and giving more background as to why the initial sentence makes sense, or the fact of that sentence is true.
Yeah,
Hopefully I
I think that,
explained that. Yeah, hopefully I explained that well.
no, I think that's a good way of putting it. I think that's a good way of putting it. Since a large number of people didn't get this one correct, which is understandable because it's not an easy one, I think I'll spend another second on it. So, indeed generally, is used to sort of reinforce the previous statement. It says the tower has been leaning southward since the initial stages of its construction over 800 years ago. And the next statement is, if the tower's construction had not taken 2 centuries and involved significant breaks due to war and civil unrest, which allowed the ground beneath the tower to settle, the tower would likely have collapsed before it was complete. So, it gives the fact that it's been leaning for a long time, and it sort of reinforces that fact by giving, some details about why that's happening, reinforcing it a bit. The fact that it's been leaning for a long time is definitely reinforced by the fact that, hard to explain, but it's reinforced to some degree by the fact that it took like 2 centuries to build, and the ground was allowed to settle. It's telling why, and it sort of acquaints you more with that fact. Therefore, as I said, really only works if there's a cause and effect relationship between the previous sentence and the next one. If there is not something in sentence 2 that was caused by something in sentence 1, then you wouldn't want to use therefore. C, nevertheless. Nevertheless is used in contexts generally relating to, it can generally function a little bit like however, actually. So I might say, it's sort of saying, it can be used in a lot of similar contexts to however. I might say, oh, I didn't eat lunch, nevertheless, I'm not very hungry. Or, you could also say, I didn't eat lunch, however, I'm not very hungry now. So those 2 answers are sort of wrong for a somewhat similar reason. Just that there's nothing incompatible with sentence 1 and sentence 2. There's no facts or opinions or statements in the 2 sentences that oppose one another in any real way. I mean, it says to some degree that the tower would have collapsed, but the idea that the tower would have collapsed if something else had happened, and the idea that the tower is leaning but has not collapsed, those are not contradictory ideas. In fact, they sort of go to reinforce one another. Yeah, so you want indeed, because indeed indicates that reinforcement. Sentence 1 says the tower has been leaning. Sentence 2 said, if the things had been different, the tower would have fallen. That sort of reinforces it. It's saying this is what happened. If something different had happened, then something different would have happened. So that to some degree reinforces the statement of what happened in sentence 1. Yeah, I guess I did 6 there. Okay, let's take a look at 14. As usual, hands up if you have any questions or would like to share what you have. Answers in the chat box if you just want to give your answer. Okay, so we've gotten a few answers in. I'll give everyone another second. Oh, so we have oh no, that's for. Okay, so we have one opposing answer. This is okay. So we have a bit of a discussion going. Good, good. I'll give people another second. Okay. Okay. So it seems like we have actually a consensus that number 14 is B. Can anyone explain why? Mariana.
Yes. So I think it's B because well, first what I did was discarding the letter C because it says it's, and before we learned that if if we have an it, we can like repeat it. So we have has made it an Italian, so we can have it. So we with that we can discard letter A and letter C. And I think it's B because B and not no D because a comma like because this second sentence is a dependent sentence on the first one, and yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's well explained. Thank you. Thank you for participating. So yeah, the way it currently stands, the way it currently stands, the word it is a new subject, and therefore it would have to either be a semicolon or a new sentence. These are just two, independent clauses. This would be a comma splice, which, as we've learned before, is not something you want. So that gets rid of A. C. C is an interesting one. I think that's fairly obviously wrong. As I'm sure you know, ITS with no apostrophe is a possessive. It's one of, I think it's the only S possessive with no apostrophe. And there's nothing possessive going on. It's not like the attracting it's not like the attracting visitors belongs to the tower. It's what the tower is doing. D is wrong because there's no separate idea. It's actually something of a cause and effect here. Yeah, something of a cause and effect here. The tower has survived, comma, doing this. not quite a cause and effect, more specification of what it's been doing, I suppose. One thing that's important to note, I worry, I was talking about comma splices before. A comma splice, you can connect to independent clauses in a sentence using a comma. It just also has to use a preposition. So I can say, I went to the store, comma, I bought some milk, comma, and I came home. That's a list of 3 independent clauses separated by commas and an and that's acceptable. Or you can just say, I went to the store and I bought some milk. No comma, and it's 2 independent clauses in a sentence set apart by an and. A comma splice, what you don't want to do, only occurs when 2 ideas not connected with a conjunction are in the same sentence and are only set apart using a comma. So saying, I went to the store, comma, I bought some milk would be unacceptable because that is 2 separate independent clauses, 2 separate ideas in the same sentence with no conjunction and no semicolon. A comma cannot do that grammatically. Manny, you want to take the last one here? And then I think we could, or maybe we could do a few more, and then we wrap up and kind of talk about future stuff we're doing.
Yeah, sure. So I can definitely take this last question here. So yes, for number 15. Oh, did we already go over 15?
No, we just did 14.
Okay. All right, yeah. So for number 15, the word weirdnesses is underlined, and it goes off of that second part of the sentence saying that it attracts visitors from all over who flock to Pisa to see one of the greatest architectural weirdnesses in the world. And so this question here is like a few of the other questions that we did before, where we're trying to figure out which word fits into the I guess the general premise of that sentence, the general flow and idea of that sentence. And so we have 4 different options here, of course. A being no change, B deviations, C oddities, and D abnormalities. And if you have an answer for 15, feel free to throw that in the chat, and we'll see where we go from there. So I'm seeing some. Okay, it's a pretty interesting mix of answers. I'm seeing a D and some B's and C's, which is interesting. I'll give everyone maybe a minute or 2 more to throw some answers in there and see what we've got. I see another D. Interesting. Here's another C as well. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, so yeah, the correct answer for number 15 is actually choice C. Would anyone like to share how they got to C for number 15? Feel free to raise your hands if you'd like. And if not, I can definitely give an explanation as well. All right, well, yeah, so for number 15, choice C is the best answer, and the explanation behind that is that it would be more appropriate to describe this building, this unusual but very famous building, as one of the greatest architectural oddities in the world. Choices A, B, and D are incorrect because if you think about it, you know, regardless of whether or not we know exactly what these words mean, um, using, the context clues, we can, using the words around it in the sentence, we can figure out that these choices have negative meanings or negative, connotations attached to them. The Tower of Pisa, as odd as it is, people love it, and it's um, a work of architecture that people all around the world go to see. It's a very famous spot, and it's better to describe it as something that's odd instead of calling it weird or abnormal. So yeah, uh, answer C for 15 was the best for that one. We've got a little bit more time, so we can take a stab at questions 16 and 17, but we'll start with 16. Um, so throw any answers you have for 16 in the chat, and feel free to raise your hands as well. Okay, I'm seeing some B's roll in. Interesting. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of B's. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of B's. So the correct answer for question number 16 is in fact choice B. Would anyone like to, again, I'd like to open the floor. Would anyone like to explain how they got to B for number 16? And feel free to raise your hand. Um, or if you'd like to, um, explain in the chat box as well, that's great too. Oh, Pietro, yes.
Okay, so well, first of all, yeah, I believe well, it should be included. So C and D are not the correct answers. But then, well, letter A tells that it provides an important restatement of something said before in the paragraph, and well, it it does not say it. So well, that's not the right answer. And also, I think it is like the sentence can work as a good transition between the two ideas of the paragraph, that is like from the oddity of that it is linked, well, that it is, I forgot the word, but yeah, sorry.
That's totally all right, Pietro. Thank you for sharing. Yes, I think for that very same reason you mentioned, the explanation for this answer is the same. The choice for choice B, it is a key shift. It's a transition. It allows people who are reading it to more easily transition from that first sentence to that next one. And it has, a lot of the same important details that are talked about in the sentence that follows after. So yes, answer B is correct for 16. And I think we'll end off with number 17 here. I think a few people have thrown some answers in the chat so far, but please feel free to answer that question as well, and throw your answer in the chat box, and feel free to raise your hands if you'd like to share your answer and how you arrived at it. All right, so I'm seeing a lot of A's. Yeah, I'm seeing lots and lots of A's. Yeah. So the correct answer for this question is yes, in fact, choice A. And the explanation for this one, which I think a lot of you were able to see, was that the comma is used correctly after that phrase in 1990. That phrase is a prepositional one that gives us a sense of time. And the comma is used correctly after it to introduce that second sentence, that independent clause that comes afterwards. Italy's government closed the tower, etc., etc. Choices B and C aren't correct because each of them place a comma between that subject, government, and the verb closed, which isn't correct in terms of punctuation and throws off the flow of the sentence. And choice D is incorrect because although you can use a comma, you can't use a colon after an introductory prepositional phrase because again, it throws off of the flow of that sentence, and colons are usually used for things like lists or things of that nature. So yes, the correct answer for 17 is letter A. Great job, everyone. So I think we are about out of time for today's session. But yeah, thank you all for coming and spending some time learning some of the tips and strategies, and there's some of the ins and outs of answering these questions on the SAT writing test. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And just so you know, we have other things, other events than SAT prep. We do Conversation Club Tuesdays and Thursdays from 10:30 to 11:30. What was that? Somebody say something? Sorry.
Sorry, that was just stuff in the background.
So we do Conversation Club 10:30 to 11:30. That's your time, of course. We discuss a bunch of really very interesting topics. We generally send out some stuff to watch before the session, and then we sort of refresh people or catch people up by, playing a short video or reading something at the beginning of the discussion, and then yeah, and we do a quick getting to know you exercise. Then we dive into a normally very interesting, very substantive discussions. I've really enjoyed it so far. We do that Tuesdays and Thursdays, 10:30 to 11:30. We also do a game night on Fridays from 5 to 6. Yeah, that's pretty low key, pretty laid back. We've done in the past 20 questions and 2 truths and a lie and trivia. And all of those were fun. I think we're going to try new stuff. Yeah, I think we're going to try new stuff pretty much every week. Yeah, no, I think it's been a really good time thus far. Yeah, here, give me one moment, and I will drop the links to those things in the chat for anyone who is interested. Here we are. I have them